So for you all, when you all got to that point, you're in the pandemic. I mean, from the outside looking in, everybody's looking at y'all as relationship goals. You all are building this incredible business. You all are creating content that's helping other people. And at the same time, this moment in history made you guys look at each other like we need we need to rework some things. We need to reconfigure some things. Um, how did that first conversation after the realization go? What's your advice if somebody has that realization, like, nah, we need to talk this through. We need to fix some things. That could be a scary moment because you have this knowledge that we need to talk, we need to fix, but there might be that fear of the other person's response, or there may be some fear of being vulnerable and transparent about how you feel right now.
Yeah, I think for us, what was essential was therapy. We were both going to individual therapy, and then we also started couples therapy. The reason therapy was very helpful is because you have a mediator, right? You have a person that's only goal is the healthier relationship. Each of us, obviously we want a healthy relationship, but we have our own desires and needs and biases, and a lot of times you can't see any other point of view than yours,
Mhm.
and it's tough to see your spouse's. So a therapist allows a person who, you know, hopefully, in the ideal situation, doesn't have Melissa's side or my side more than the other.
The relationship is their client.
The relationship is their client. That's good. I like that. And I think for us, it allowed us to be honest. And then if there's somebody to tell you when you're wrong and when you're right, that's not your spouse. Because sometimes your spouse tell you you're wrong, and you can't hear it. But a person outside telling you, hey, actually, your spouse is right about this, or to watch your spouse be told they're wrong and to enjoy that and be like, ha, I've been trying to tell you, I ain't tripping. So I think that I can say, to Melissa's earlier point, had we not done that, I think we would have been married for a long time. But like she was saying, longevity isn't a indicator of health in a relationship. It's just time. You can do anything for a long time. You can play in the NBA for 25 seasons. Doesn't mean you're good. I mean, it's unlikely, but you get my point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And just because you're married for 20, 25 years, that doesn't mean you're happy. And I think early on, that was our barometer.
Mm-hmm.
Just stay together because people are getting divorced. If you're staying together, you're already winning. Back in the day, people never got divorced. So back in the day, women couldn't get jobs that easily either. So there was nowhere to go. And that's the reason a lot of people stayed. So to answer your question, I don't remember your question.
Well, I think it goes to
You said the mediation of therapy helped
yeah,
you all have a conversation with
yeah.
each
Sometimes I
other.
talk so much that I just get attached to the sound of my own voice.
Hello. It was a good answer, Kev.
So I'm curious about this. And let me back up. If you are trying to approach this conversation, maybe you don't have therapy going on right now, I would recommend Kevin and Melissa's book because they give you 12 conversations that you all need to have, and they put tips at the end of each chapter to help you have the conversation that you need to have and give you some things to think about within that particular category. When you all were thinking through these topics, things like roles in the marriage, things like communication, things like intimacy, how did you all come up with the list of, hey, these are some conversations that you all should probably be having with each other to strengthen your marriage?
We say this from the Love Hour perspective, and also I think it's applicable to the book. We're our own first students. We're our own first test dummies. These are conversations we wish we had earlier. These are conversations we wish we could redo. Even when I think about the parenting chapter, those parenting and the quarantine chapter are my personal two favorite chapters. The parenting chapter, particularly, is because we went into that chapter thinking how much we were going to be able to boast about how great of a partnership we had because when our kids were young, I fed them, Kev changed them. We had this whole routine going. And by the end, you start to realize wait, this was a really fragile, transitional time in our relationship that we didn't even understand in real time that impacts us today, 18 years later, or well, 16 and 14 years later, because that's how old our kids are. But we didn't have an appreciation for how fragile transitions are. When you think about a change of power, every 4 years, when we have a change of power in the United States, it's a super vulnerable time in our democracy. I mean, the 2020 election was a prime example that we were like, what is going to happen to America if this man decides not to step down? It is a super vulnerable time. When kids entered our relationship, we didn't have an appreciation for how that was going to change our dynamic. And that's a conversation that surprised us, that like, wait, this isn't going the way we thought this chapter was going to go. And so I think it's a question that other married couples with children can go back and say, how did that affect us in the way that maybe we're not realizing? How did kids entering our relationship change our dynamics that we maybe didn't realize in real time, but we're suffering those consequences today, and we maybe haven't been able to articulate it, or we maybe haven't had a conversation about it. Again, we're our own first test dummies. We're our own first students. So we realize it. So that's why we talk about it. And that's why it's the book we wish we had.
Yeah.
Now, you talked about earlier how you all would be sitting like secretly miserable. You're looking at these other couples that are around you that seem seemingly happy, and then next thing you looked up, they're not married anymore. What do you think is the difference between because the book and the premise and the message that you're giving us is that marriage be hard. How do you find the guts, the courage, that when it gets hard, to not quit, to do the work instead before giving up?
I think I'll use this analogy. I think sometimes it's important for us to realize that, we're on the same team, right? You watch a football game, the offense takes the field, the defense takes the field, the special teams take the field. They're all on the same team. They may not be playing at the same time. And sometimes the offense is playing poorly, the defense is frustrated. Sometimes the offense is playing great and the defense is struggling. The offense is frustrated. But at the end of the game, your team wins or your team loses. And I think for us, it was important to realize that we are on the same team. Sometimes it doesn't feel like that, but like the relationship is the client for the therapist. Our marriage is important to us. So we had to remind ourselves of that often to kind of like recalibrate ourselves. And you have to do what's best for the team. Like, that's why we started therapy. We realized we had been trying, I'll speak for myself here. I had been avoiding therapy because I felt like if we go to therapy, it's a sign that something is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I secretly, I don't know why and where this misguided thought came from, but I secretly had started to feel like we could, boast a little bit. I mean, we've been married 15, 16 years. We ain't even went to therapy. Y'all over there having to go. We ain't got to go. That's how good our marriage is. And then all of a sudden you're arguing or the same thing over and over, and you're feeling like, I don't know how else to tell this woman this. And I remember telling Melissa, we should, we would go back and forth. But I remember one time I was like, I don't know how else to deal with this scenario. I want to rectify this, but I'm out of answers. We really should talk to someone that can help us navigate this. And then once we started, I remember like the first session with our current therapist, and I'll be honest about this. Our first therapist was sweet butt juice. So we had to make sure we had to let that person go and find somebody that fit. And it's okay if the first one or two or three don't work.
It's a whole process.
It's a process.
Don't be discouraged. We all got to go through it.
But I remember in the therapist that we have now, I remember having the moment where I'm like, oh, she's a professional at this.
Right.
She's thinking of questions and making connections that Melissa and I would have never made. And that's why it's helpful. It's as silly as it sounds. It was like having pneumonia and being like, I ain't going to go to the doctor. I'm going to be able to tell people that I beat pneumonia myself. How do you make penicillin? I'm sure there's some rubbing alcohol and some hydrogen and some garlic salt. You'd be
definitely
like,
garlic salt's in there.
Somebody's went to school for this. Somebody can help you. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it.
Melissa, how did you handle the period where you felt therapy would be good, but Kevin wasn't yet on board yet? Because I think there might be more people in that current state where somebody feels like, hey, we should get help, but it may not be a realization for both parties just yet. How did you handle that interim period?
Well, I actually think for Kevin and I, we had a flip flop. So in the very beginning of our relationship, even if when I look back on it now, and this is like in the moment kind of thinking back, actually, because I don't know that I've realized it in real time, but when we first were newly married and I was getting into like reading books and podcasts and all of those things, I wanted Kevin to join in. It wasn't therapy, but I think it was my way of being like, something is wrong. Don't you want to listen to this podcast specifically from here to here? Don't you want to read this book, specifically these pages and this chapter? And he really wasn't with it. Fast forward, and again, when he was talking about I'm not equipped, these were almost he was crying out at this point, because I'm thinking I have a lot of information. I don't want to say all the information because that ain't true, but I have a lot of information. I've read a lot of books. I listen to a lot of podcasts. I'm actually, every therapist I've ever had has always said, like, girl, you're very introspective. Sometimes it's a bad thing, so I don't even say that, like, look at me, because sometimes it'd be like, girl, you should chill out. But anyway, having all of that information, and I'm like, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this, and he's like, I'm ill-equipped. I really want us to do therapy. Then I had to come to the point where I'm like, okay, I agree, because the scariest part about therapy is that it is extremely vulnerable. You will go in there and you will say, well, he walked out the house and I was crying because I didn't understand why he would leave me like that. And your therapist is like, well, let's talk about your abandonment and rejection issues. And you're like, first of all, how did we get there so quickly? Abandonment, rejection. Ma'am, I said he walked out the door and that pissed me off. And now you're asking me about abandonment. I'm confused on your connection. Well, when's the first time you felt abandoned? Was it your mother? Was it your father? And you're like, well, now I'm crying because yes, indeed, it was my mother. Like, and all of a sudden it's this. And so thinking about, oh my God, we're going to go into therapy and they're going to actually see me. It's super vulnerable and that's really scary. But I know I said all of that and people are like, yeah, that's the reason I ain't going. But let me tell you something about the really beautiful thing about therapy. And I think we did a phenomenal job on this book. And it is something that can be a conversation starter, which is why it's 12 conversations. We hope that it is a prompt in your relationship to start having these conversations. What you will find is as you're having them and you start diving deep, you reach a point where you're at, where do we go from here? I don't quite know what the next step is. That's where your therapist steps in. And what they allow you to do, this is an intervention our therapist just did like this week or maybe last week, and it's literally one of my favorites. They allow you to redo a moment. And you have this moment, Kevin slams the door. This doesn't happen, but this is the example I've been using, so we're going to continue it. Kevin slams the door and I'm sitting and I can't stand you and you left and da-da-da, and I'm going off. And so he's like, first of all, and he's meeting this energy. You sit in therapy and she's going to tell you this is abandonment, this is rejection, da-da-da. If you could redo this moment, what would you have said? And then suddenly this energy turns into, I really just wanted to talk about this with you because it was really important to me that I felt like we were teammates and we were in it together and we were able to come to a resolution together. And instead, when you walked out the door, that told me you didn't care about us, you didn't care about me, and you didn't care about fixing this situation. And that really hurts me because this relationship is so important to me. Immediately, walls break down. Immediately, the defensiveness that comes with this energy is met with, oh man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I was flooded with emotion. I didn't know how to handle it. I didn't want to hurt your feelings. And so I had to remove myself. The opportunity to redo those type of moments and not lead with your harder, angrier emotions and lead with your softer emotions are interventions that we don't know as regular people. I didn't see my mama lead with her softer side. I didn't see my daddy lead with his softer side. I saw them argue. I saw them fuss. I saw them fight. And that's what we take in. What we saw is what we do. And a therapist allows you to be taught something different so you can do something different.